story, Dr. Griffin, know less of yours. And we're just going to spend a little bit of time where our biggest point of intersection is that both of you have been living out faith at work for a very long time in your sectors for different reasons in different contexts. And I know that Chuck is like just getting off of a high of last week of like his big Excel summit of inviting a bunch of people to Cincinnati to explore and to expose kind of faith at work in their cities. And Dr. Griffin is like moving into the season of uh, organizing and inviting and helping to expose faith at work in these 18 different cities around the country. But I'm also really curious about like your story in CMDA, you bringing faith to work, like all those kinds of things personally, but then also kind of like organizationally. So, but why don't you just go first and then Chuck, and be great.
Okay. I came to Christ in dental school around 1981, and from that point, almost immediately, the Lord gave me a strong desire to communicate the gospel, even when I wasn't quite sure what the gospel was. And that that desire continued within my dental practice. And in 1995, I attended a conference put on by CMDA called the Saline Solution, which is a conference designed to teach healthcare professionals how to communicate the love of Christ to their patients. And I loved it, and I went 3 more times, and that remained a big part of my practice until I left my practice in December of 2018 to go full-time with CMDA.
It's called the Saline Solution. Did I hear
Well,
that
the
correctly?
the first program was called the Saline Solution, and you might be able to envision where that comes from, but just very quickly.
My contact lenses.
Well, okay, that's when we think about it. But the ideal pH of the body is, I think, around 7.1 or 7.2, something like that. It's not supposed to be too acidic, and it's not supposed to be too basic. And you can see the metaphor that can be for sharing the gospel, that you need to speak the truth, but if it's going to take roots, it's got to be love in it. So I think that's where the name originated. And it was a tremendous program, mostly live seminars that were given lots of places across the US. It eventually went internationally. And then several years later, they came up with another program called Grace Prescriptions, which led by the same 2 people, a physician and a pastor. And about 4 years ago, they put me in charge of the 3rd iteration, which is called Faith Prescriptions. And this program is a bit different, although it rests on the same foundation of how healthcare is a tremendous platform for the gospel, how when people are dealing with physical challenges, they are far more likely to recognize their spiritual challenges. And the program is not just to help people come to know Christ, it's also to encourage those that already belong to Christ. And so this Faith Prescriptions program is a series of, right now, 28 15-minute videos available on CMDA's Online Learning Center, and 3 more videos in the works. So there'll be at least 31, dealing with lots of different topics. Some of them apply to all healthcare professionals, like how to pray with patients, how to take a spiritual history, communicating the gospel, dealing with the reality of time, things that apply to all healthcare professionals. And then some others apply to specific sections of healthcare, like caring for those near the end of life, caring for those with addictions, caring for those with depression. There's an episode for students, an episode for those that are in academic medicine. There's a specific episode for dentistry. So lots of different videos, and 15-minute video, you can't say a whole lot. The primary purpose, even though there's good content developed by about 20 different docs across the country, the primary purpose of the videos is to launch a group into discussion of that topic. So each video has connected with it 8 to 10 discussion questions, and there's also a leader's guide that gives some proposed answers to those questions. So that's our hope, is that people will form groups and study this material as a group, and not just for what they'll get out of the videos, not even just for what they'll get out of the discussion, but the third factor, which is that mutual encouragement and accountability. I created groups like this before I ever went to Saline Solution and back in 95, just groups of local Christian healthcare professionals. We'd meet on Saturday mornings once a month or so for breakfast. And whenever I had a meeting coming up, I would be extra sensitive to addressing the spiritual needs of my patients because I knew I was going to be talking about it with other Christian doctors. And so I think of all the possible benefits of this program, that one anothering is perhaps the most powerful aspect of it. So as we develop new episodes, and I think we're close to the end of developing new episodes, as we do that, we're also encouraging members and also non-members to begin to go through the video series to form a group and to hopefully encourage each other to overcome the secular, pluralistic, naturalistic tendencies that our country has, especially those that are in science, especially those that are in healthcare. So that might have been a long nutshell, but that was a nutshell. And then along with that, I'll mention also that this is somewhat unrelated to that, but I have been put in charge of a series of presentations that one of 5 CMDA senior staff will do across the nation. And actually, Paul, when we last talked, it was 18, but Boise and Charlottesville have dropped out. So looks like it's going to be 16 cities where one of 5 senior staff members will go and give a presentation. The presentations are different. They're on about 5 different topics. And at those presentations, we have 2 goals, I guess you could say, in an overarching sense. 2 goals for these 16 visits to various cities. One goal, and primarily, is to stimulate the local ministry that's going on at that site. CMDA has formal chapters at about 46 cities across the country and other informal chapters in other places. So we want to create that group dynamic to help encourage Christian ministry in healthcare. And then secondly, to help connect some of those local healthcare professionals with headquarters in Bristol, Tennessee. So those are the 2 goals that we have in the 16 cities that will be visited. I'm visiting 3 of those 16 cities. The 3 in Colorado happen to have a son in Denver. What a coincidence! But when you when they make you over the whole program, the least I could do is get first choice as to which cities I get to go to. So that's why I'll be there.
So good.
The business guy in me says that's awesome. A tax deductible business trip.
Yeah, can't beat it.
And just check a little bit orientation. And Bill, you tell me, like other parts of CMDA that I found to be really impressive, like your learning platform that Faith Prescriptions is on, also has a bunch that are CME, like their version of like credit accounting towards their, is it every 2 years that they have to get so many CMEs? So for Christ followers in healthcare and dentistry, like they can, as a part of their job, they can or have to receive some of these. They also have like 5 different podcasts. So like a lot of different equipping content. And I think every quarter or maybe a couple times a year, there's a marriage conference for physicians and their wives, or vice versa for their.
Good points, Paul. You did your homework. There are actually
I've known this for months. I've been waiting to like, this is fun.
Well, there are actually 46 different ministries that are a part of CMDA, and don't ask me to name them all because I'm not sure I could. But there's a placement service for Christian docs that are looking for jobs or looking for employees. There's a missions organization that puts on about 40 trips a year. We do tours to various biblical sites. I get to go to, where am I going? I get to go to Greece in September on one of those tours. Lots of different ministries. The Online Learning Center is one as well. We have a coaching department. We have a malpractice ministry. So ultimately, if I were to sum it up somehow, we sense that our calling is to serve our members, minister to our members, so they can do a better job ministering through healthcare. For the most part, we we don't directly provide medical and dental services as an organization, but just about all of our 13,000 members do. So we serve them so they can serve others.
So I heard 46 different ministries. As I can recall, there's about 75 full-time staff and 50 part-time staff consultancy kind of folks that are
Right.
that are looking at all these different angles and trying to continue to better serve the member. Which the umbrella is like, is it any practicing person in healthcare and in dentistry? Like, it doesn't have to be credentialed, but like most of the members are.
Yes, well, CMDA stands for the Christian Medical and Dental Associations with an S at the end, which is the Christian Medical Association and the Christian Dental Association. But in addition to physicians and dentists, we also have about 13 different specialty groups, such as PAs, NPs, OBGYNs, subsets of those groups that are included as well. I didn't mention also that one of our ministries is advocacy, where we seek to recognize what the big cases are in all the different states across the country, and then help our members develop a biblical perspective on those cases and look for members that can be named in suits that come up. We work with an organization called ADF, Alliance Defending Freedom, to try to stand for a biblical perspective on healthcare issues. So that's a big part of what we do. That's about $500,000 a year, and there's no income from that. That's something that our members support because there's really no other Christian organization that's in the position CMDA is to do that. I will say that we have connected with some other groups, the Coptic Medical Association, Catholic Medical Association, American Association of Pro-Life OBGYNs, and there's a Pediatric Association. Together, we've formed what's called the Alliance for Hippocratic Medicine that, as I mentioned, seeks to stand for what the scriptures teach about healthcare. Okay, let me shut up and see where you want to go from there.
Yeah, I did not know those things.
I just had some questions. It's really fun listening and learning. It sounds like as you put this together, you've been able to create a resource which sparks community at the local level. So you're really encouraging Christians in the healthcare professions to come together in community where they're living and working. Mm-hmm. Number two, you've developed targeted training materials that are speaking to different dimensions of healthcare from a Christian worldview. Anything from just general stuff around sharing faith to stuff like dealing with mental illness and things like that. So some of it can be much more targeted and some of it's more general. And then it sounds like the third thing is advocacy for living out your faith in the medical profession. And perhaps even, I don't know if the right word is, but modeling. You're looking for ways to build collaborative relationships with other ministry initiatives in the healthcare space rather than just doing things by yourselves.
Well put, well put. And when you mentioned modeling, something else came to mind. We do have a presence at about 353 professional schools, medical schools, dental schools. So we do seek to engage with healthcare professionals as they are becoming healthcare professionals in their training years, in their school years, in their residency years, so that as they're acquiring this empirical knowledge about how the human body works, they're also acquiring the ability to recognize God's hand in those human bodies and how they treat them.
And do the members, as you're describing them here, do they pay annual dues that then generate the revenue stream that supports this work?
There are annual dues, but those dues, last I remember, covered about 12% of our budget. So there are other ways that people support us above and beyond their dues that keep us going. People are very generous by and large. And a part of this, just I'll mention that there are an awful lot of people that are involved with CMDA ministry that are not CMDA members. They do something locally. They may hardly even know there's a headquarters because they're tapped in locally. And we want people to be involved locally, but we also would love to grow our membership, those that actually stand with the organization. I think dues are about $450 a year, something like that. And so, like I said, that's about 12% of what it takes to keep us going.
So the 88% that keeps you going comes from just general donations?
Not completely, and I don't have the percentages, but there are other sources of income. As I said, we have mission trips that people pay to be on. And so that our department, Global Health Outreach, our missions department, they are self-sufficient. They brought in a little bit more than they spent last year. We also put on tours that bring in some money. There are of the staff members that are across the country, and also a few at headquarters, some of them raise their own funds. And so those are sources of income as well. But a great deal of it is donations from individuals.
Okay. So donations, economic engines to some degree,
Mhm.
like the mission trips. And do you guys do grants also for like specific programmatic initiatives?
Individuals and probably companies have created grants for certain purposes. For example, in dental, a relatively young dentist passed away who was heavily involved in mission trips. So we raised about $42,000, and that's used to introduce dentists to their first trip with CMDA. $1,500 goes towards the cost of their each trip. I know a dentist right now who's creating a fund to support dental students going on mission trips. Global Health Outreach also has funds available. So there might be pockets here and there. It's not ministry-wide scholarships. It's more individuals who have chosen to create those scholarships of their own accord
Okay.
within CMDA.
And you won't be the only person on this, of course, but it sounds like CMDA is embarking on a multi-city tour to go connect with the local leaders and spark all the things that we just talked about. Is that sort of a key model that you use year after year to connect with the different cities, or do you have like one big shindig where everybody's coming in, or do you do both, or what does that look like?
Good question. This is the third year we've done it. The first year we had 6 sites. It was sort of a learning, well, they're all learning experiences, but that first year we sort of tested the waters regarding what people might want to hear. And so the second year, which was last year, I think we probably had about the same number as this year, somewhere around 16 cities. And this year again, 16. So we're not irreversibly committed to doing it every year, but these 3 years we have been successful in growing ministry. One of our big goals, we're about to adopt a new strategic plan. And one of our big goals in the strategic plan is to determine how to create new local chapters and also how to grow the local chapters that exist, because of the various local groups across the country, some of them are solid and have lots of ministry going on for students and graduates. Others are just getting started. Like I'll be talking in Denver on September 6th, and they have 2 or 3 people that want to get something going. And there are lots, I'm sure there are lots of Christian healthcare professionals in Denver, and across the nation that we haven't reached yet that don't know what they can find through CMDA.
Yeah. In addition to fledgling chapters and chapters that are active, do you have chapters that struggle, and what does support look like in a situation like that?
Well, there are different models, I guess you might say. Like, for example, in Houston, we have a well-established chapter, a well-established board. They have a budget that pays one individual to act as the local director. And so they have the funds necessary to expand their ministry. In Chicago, we've got a wonderful physician, but she works half-time and she oversees the area and heads the board the rest of the time. They don't really have much of a budget to speak of. So some sites, for as an example, some sites are having pretty fancy events with dinner at a restaurant or whatever. And in Denver, it's going to be a dessert function at somebody's home. So that kind of illustrates the fact that there is a large continuum of some groups that, as I said, are well established with good funding, and other groups that are trying to reach that point.
Are you guys set up then in a way where each chapter kind of develops its way of working the way it wants to versus you sort of prescribe, this is how it's done?
I'd say it was a combination of the two. We have one person at headquarters, a good friend. His name is Bill Reichart. He oversees all of campus and community ministries. As I said, the campus of 353 campus sites, and then community ministries, depending on which ones you count, somewhere between 45 and 90 local ministries. And then under Bill, we have 4 full-time regional directors, one for the Northeast, one for the South, one for the Midwest, and one for the West. And so those 4 regional directors create a certain level of cohesiveness within their regions. They talk with each other to find out what's working, and then they give local chapters options as to what they could do. But yes, there's a great deal of autonomy within those local chapters to follow through on what seems good for their area.
Okay. And as they generate funding to build their local chapters, do they keep all of that funding, or do they bring some of it back to you guys as the central organization?
A percentage of that stays at CMDA for administrative overhead costs. So those formalized chapters do receive contributions. CMDA keeps track of those things for a percentage, and then the rest of the funds are available for their ministry. Yes.
Okay. And bear with me, I know I'm asking a lot of questions, but I'm really enjoying just learning how you're doing things. Mm-hmm. If that strategic plan of yours really plays out well, what does next level look like for CMDA 3 years from now?
Well, that was one of the central components of CMDA strategic plan. A second one that I'm over, has to do with member services and membership, trying to grow membership, which obviously means not only increasing the number of new members, but closing the door to members who might otherwise leave, finding out what they're looking for and trying to provide those things. So a big portion of his membership, we haven't finalized the strategic plan yet, but those are the 2 things that come to mind. So I think both fit into a goal of CMDA becoming a more mainstream organization. I actually live in I live in Yorktown, Virginia, but I travel 6 hours each way once a month to work in Bristol. And I spend 2 weeks in Bristol and then drive back to Yorktown. And I say that because on a regular basis, I meet healthcare professionals in Bristol and they haven't heard of CMDA. And so we are unfortunately a well-kept secret. And yet, as I said, in my mind, it's a unique organization that provides opportunities for Christians in healthcare that don't exist in the same quantity anywhere else. So we would like to become more mainstream for this country. Just as an example, have y'all heard of World Magazine?
I have not.
Okay. Well, you got to find out about World Magazine. It's a periodic publication. To my knowledge, it's the only periodic publication that seeks to keep up with regular events from a Christian perspective. And they also have a podcast called The World and Everything in It. They've been going for at least 30 years that I've been a part of them. Anyway, we are about to take out a full-page ad in World Magazine, the next 12 issues. It's actually a monthly magazine now. And so when people think about current events, and I can't think of a better site, a better source, whether it's the podcast or the magazine, to get a Christian perspective on everyday news, but we want to become a part of that stream that becomes mainstream for the Christian community.
Okay. The ministry that I lead is headquartered in Cincinnati, Ohio. What infrastructure, if any, do you have on the ground in our city, and what would help look like to support you in developing Cincinnati as a market?
Well, our Midwest Regional Director, who I think, Paul, you probably met, is Connor Ham. I was on a Zoom meeting with him this morning, as a matter of fact. So Connor oversees the whole Midwest. And It was a year and a half ago that we had our national convention in Cincinnati. So Cincinnati does have a board. They have an area director. I don't know how well developed that particular ministry is, but they do have regular things going on there. That's about as far as I can get with the particulars. There are other things going on in Ohio. We have ministry in Columbus, Ohio. One of our events will be in Columbus, Ohio. We don't have one scheduled in Cincinnati. We have ministry at Ohio State. We have ministry at Case Western. So those are the things that come to mind. That's about as particular as I can get.
So it sounds like, from a follow-up standpoint, Connor would be a point of contact for Cincinnati, but more generally for the Midwest. So, for example, the state of Ohio would be part of that. And it sounds like there may be some leaders in the Cincinnati area, but the level of development for CMDA may be relatively small at this point. So perhaps for our ministry, what help would look like is just trying to come around their development, connecting Christian healthcare professionals into whatever embryonic community currently exists.
I'm not able to use the phrase small because I don't have firsthand knowledge, but I can say about every single local chapter in the country that there are far more Christians in healthcare in every single city than are involved with CMDA. So we can certainly say room for growth with every single ministry we're a part of.
Okay. All right. Anything else about CMDA that I should have asked about or we should have heard about?
No, we did great.
You
covering
got me
stuff.
around pretty well, Chuck. I think you did a good job.
That was awesome. Fun. Chuck, I'm excited to hear the crossover because it's Bill, you said 2018 was when you came on full time, but it was 1995 when you went to your first saline solution.
That was actually the first saline solution conference, the first of hundreds that occurred after that. And I got to the very first one, drove 7 hours to Asheville, North Carolina. And yeah, that was a huge acceleration into my desire to communicate Christ through healthcare.
And it's fun because I love witnessing how God is moving separately in people for about 20 plus years and not knowing each other, but have such high degree of vision that, Chuck's journey has been about 25 years. And Chuck, please share your story.
Please, yeah.
All right. I'll give the executive summary, the abbreviated version, and then whatever questions you have. I'm a guy who did not grow up in the church, Bill. I came to Christ at 31. And that was after a decade of studying comparative world religion. So I kind of walked into Christianity like a giant spirituality funnel. And I mention that for two reasons. One, I'm not the kind of guy that dies on denominational hills because my initial frame of reference was something like a Christianity versus an Islam or a Confucianism versus Presbyterians versus Pentecostals and all that. Mm-hmm. The second thing is that knowing that about my own background, as a guy who came to Christ as a young 30-something working professional, I was spending most of my waking hours at work. And so as a new believer, I was passionate to live out my faith in all of my life, and work was one of the most important slices of that pie.
Right.
My frame of reference for church was the early church, where faith and work were seamlessly integrated. There was no dichotomy at all. So I was stunned as I got involved as a new believer in lots of local church stuff, and I was watching with some shock, to be honest, that the vast majority of working Christians and local churches don't focus on work life, tend to go to church on Sunday and work on Monday. The statistics are, according to Barna from their 2018 study, only 28% of working Christians even aspire to a faith life where they work. And I found as a practitioner on the ground, Bill, that only 1 out of every 20 working Christians, about 5%, consistently bring Sunday faith to Monday work.
How do you
That,
get through the day?
how do I what?
How does one get through? How do 19 out of 20 get through the day?
Well, that's a great question. And
The rhetorical
that's what
question.
I'm saying. That was where I felt so absolutely befuddled. And as a guy, again, without a knowledge of church history, I was like, what happened in 2000 years from the early church to this church? Like, what is this? I mean, honestly, it really staggered me. I understand today because I've done a lot of research to understand what happened in the history of the church. But the long and short of it is that I got this nudge. Today I'd describe it as a calling, but back then, if you said calling, I would say somebody's calling me on the telephone. I didn't know what a calling was, but I could not get the thought out of my head that I had to figure out a way to bring my faith to my own work. And then eventually I needed to help other Christians to do the same. The ministry I lead, called At Work on Purpose, is born out of that kind of DNA. I think of us in very simple terms as a 21st century expression of the first century church at work. Our vision is to restore full Christian commitment and contribution to work. And in the early church sense, what that means is simply that everything you think and you do is if it's not sinful, is sacred. If you're either moving in the direction of God's will and through your work or away from it. And the idea in the most simple terms was just be faith active at work. Every day we make choices at work, and how do we become more choiceful so that we can be more faithful at work? It was that simple. What surprised me in the earliest days of our journey was that I didn't start out with an expectation to lead a ministry. I just wanted a life group for work life. And I couldn't find a local church that would sponsor what I saw in my head. So I decided to do it on my own. And I just found a dozen working Christians in the city of Cincinnati that had a heart for faith at work. And we just started to meet every couple weeks. We had no organized curriculum, but the Holy Spirit was very present in the conversations. They were electric. And it was sort of like taking lenses off and looking at work from a completely different vantage point. Everybody's got a job, but you actually have a platform to be an ambassador of reconciliation and to minister. I know I'm preaching to the choir, through products and services. So all that to say, we started to go viral, and we started attracting lots of working Christians who loved that idea. And just like you were saying with the medical profession, they were just everyday working Christians from all walks of work life saying, this is a really great point, and I would like to have my faith in my work, and my local church doesn't talk about it, but this community is, and let's get started with that, whatever that is. So over the past 20 years, we've been working on figuring out what that is. And what we've learned, if I boil it all down, is that the best way to organize and mobilize working Christians to be faith active at work is to bring them together as faithful working Christians in community. And what I mean in very simple terms by that is faithful, meaning somebody's committed to bringing faith to work. They may not know all of how to do that or even what that is, but they are committed to the principle and they want to figure it out. And in community means that they're not going it alone. When we go to our local churches, we're surrounded by other believers and we've got lots of community, but your typical working Christian goes to work on Monday morning and they feel completely alone, totally isolated. The truth is, they're working with other Christians, but they've never even done a spiritual audit of the place where they work to even know where the other believers are. So we've really impressed on our own local community the idea of find other believers in the workplace with whom you can build relationships, and then figure out how the Lord could work through you guys collectively to live out your faith in your own vocational work and to be the church collectively at work in the place where God has strategically deployed you. which in some cases is healthcare, but in other cases is government or education or whatever. And again, I know I'm preaching to the choir. So over the course of 21 years now, we started out with that small group of a dozen people, and today it's a decentralized organic network of over 12,000 working Christians who have all opted in to bring their faith to their work. So that's what we are. We are a network. We're not structured like a local church. We're not structured like a parachurch. That's why I was asking you questions about your organizing model.
Mm-hmm.
Genuinely interested to know. And because my tent making is a business consultancy, I spent a lot of time with clients thinking through strategy and structure and staffing and stuff like that. And so it's always interesting to me what organizational development looks like. And in our case, it's very much in the frame of reference of the early church, which I would argue was a network. It was designed as a network. The last thing I would mention is, as a piece of background and then shift gears to questions, is that we have been very intentional to model what the early church did, which was they weren't just pursuing vocational flourishing, finding and fulfilling a highest and best use for the individual, but also cultural flourishing, seeking the peace and prosperity of the cities where we work and where we live. Thus, our mission statement is to mobilize working Christians for vocational and cultural flourishing. What that means is we spend a lot of time equipping, engaging individual Christians to find and fulfill their vocational calling at work, and we bring working Christians together for the city, not just to work in the city, but to be for the flourishing of their cities. The summit that we were talking about just a little bit ago is something we do once a year to cast vision for what it looks like when the whole church at work can come together to bring the whole gospel to the whole city.
Well, I don't know if you're preaching to the choir or not, but it's a song that I love to hear. And even as I say that, I know that none of us are completely consistent in living out our faith in any environment, but there is such power when you recognize that the way you make your livelihood has to reflect the one who's given us life. And it's a natural transition as long as you're not doing something immoral in the process. I don't think statues to Artemis would fit the model that you're looking for here. So I love what you're describing. And as you were talking there towards the end about the whole church, the whole gospel, the whole city, you reminded me of one more CMDA ministry. We have begun a dental residency plus program in Memphis, Tennessee, and we are just now starting another one in Detroit, Michigan. And the dentists that have graduated that go to those residency programs, it is an incarnational event. They actually live among the people that they seek to serve in these these dentally underserved clinics. And so there is and I know a number of other clinics across the country that aren't directly CMDA related, but that include CMDA members who, as you're describing, seek to have a transformational effect, not just on individuals, but on the culture of the city. So that's very much in keeping with what we're striving to be a part of as well.
Yes, and the direct connect for me with you is that years ago, this was a long time ago, right out of the gate in 2003, we started to realize that the best way for us to develop together was to seek out those who were already pursuing faith in the workplace, build relationships with them, support the work that they were doing, and then celebrate them, champion them. It was kind of taking a page out of the Blackaby's book, Experiencing God, just see where God's already moving and joining there. And we were just applying that strategy in the workplace. So when I learn about a ministry like CMDA, I'm like, okay, what does it look like for us to build relationship with the people that are leading that, to understand the felt needs, to see how we can be helpful, and then to champion what you're doing so that others can begin to participate. And that's what I would love to do in the Cincinnati area. Thus my questions earlier.
Okay. Okay, understood. The questions that come to mind are the Presbyterian kind. It's like, how do we do this decently and in order and yet not quench the spirit? I mean, I'm a systems kind of guy, and I think to myself, well, let me back up with a question first. In addition to what's happening in Cincinnati, are there other hubs, other locations that you would say are central or prominent in your attempting to see Christ honored in the workplace? Other cities?
Yes. Round about 2011, there was a professor at Regent University who reached out to me who had been studying workplace ministries in cities. And Jason Benedict is his name. And he called me up and he said, Chuck, you guys are far and away the largest citywide workplace ministry I've ever encountered. And I responded to him. I said, what is a citywide workplace ministry? I'd never heard that phrase before. And his point was simply that in the vast majority of cities, you'll see a series of workplace ministries in the city, but they're typically as siloed and often as territorial as local churches and denominations. So they are all present in the city, but they're disconnected from each other. We had been practicing the experiencing God thing, building relationships, understanding the different ministries that were underway, how we could be helpful in building a network. Sometimes I use the metaphor of a fishnet where the ropes are relationships and the knots in the net are workplace ministry initiatives, with the vision that you could create a net large enough that you could cast it across the skyline of an entire city. And we have learned over the years that there are other cities that are doing this too. It's not the norm, but there are other types of models for this. We've begun to build a network of cities that are pursuing what we call citywide workplace movement. And I won't belabor the details of that today, but I think inside of it ultimately will rest not just individual cities and models, but also initiatives that are designed to bring other cities together in networks and how we could ultimately grow this as a network of networks. Now, inside of that, the devil's in the detail. If you're a Presbyterian and you're crunchy in the word and you love systems and method and details, this is hard work, because underneath it are all kinds of different philosophies and operational methodologies that don't always synchronize very easily. So it's not like you just take Lego blocks and they automatically click together. It's more like you're trying to figure out a city ecosystem. And that requires some real effort. I would tell you though, where we've made some progress is first, just for ourselves, articulating what in our case we mean by a citywide workplace ministry versus just a workplace ministry in a city, so that we can better demarcate citywide models for workplace ministry versus just a workplace ministry that's in a city, or in some cases workplace ministries that have chapters in cities. And that's a great thing. So there's nothing wrong with that. But in our case, it's like if you're trying to build that interconnected network across the city, well, what are the differentiating characteristics? The thing we've learned over the years, Bill, is 4 differentiating characteristics. And what I love to do is give people the visual metaphor of a sandbox, where these 4 differentiators are like boards that frame the sandbox where we, as the children of God, can go in and play in the sand and make sandcastles for the king.
Okay.
The first of the 4
Wait a minute.
different...
There was something in there about building on the sand. I don't think it came out too well, but keep going.
Oh, did my connection break up?
You're good. You're good. Keep going.
Okay.
The writing in the sand.
The writing in the sand, the footprints in the sand. There are all kinds of metaphors in the sand. And I'm just saying I'm envisioning sand in a sandbox. And the 4 boards in the sandbox, the first one is a shared vision for the city. for the city, not a ministry in a city that is sort of living out the mission of the headquarters, wherever it's located, but that there's a set of working Christians and workplace ministries that have a common view of what flourishing would look like in their city. Now, a simple one that we have just in our case in Cincinnati is that a day would come when all 350,000 self-identified working Christians in our greater Cincinnati area would become faith active at work, because we know when that day comes, they won't just transform the workplace in our city, they will transform our entire city through their efforts wherever they're working. It's a shared vision. It's in our case, a big, holy, audacious goal. Second is an interdenominational posture where Presbyterians who are crunchy in the word and Pentecostals who are juicy in the spirit can worship separately over the weekends, but they can work together for the common cause of Christ through the work week. That's more easily said than done. I mean, we've so institutionalized this idea of silos that you can almost feel like you're breaking theological, confidences or something if you work with somebody who goes to a different church and belongs to a different denomination. I mean, there's a lot of deprogramming and reprogramming that comes with this. The third differentiator is a network infrastructure. We don't look at all like a corporation, like a pyramid model. And expressions of that in the ministry world would include models like a C12 that will have chapters, or organizations like Nehemiah Entrepreneurial Community that licenses their material. And these are all good models for the application that they have, but that's not who we are. The citywide workplace ministry communities that we've found are also not structured like local churches where you have like a senior pastor and an elder board and stuff like that. Instead, what you have is you have a network of people who opt in for the common conversation and for common activity that they're interested in. And the network that they end up building has nodes in it, which are different kinds of workplace ministry initiatives that are available to all working Christians in the city, but they're interconnected through relationship. To be a decentralized organic network of spiritual influence that canvasses a city is not easy to do. It's backbreaking work because you have to forge trusting relationships with all kinds of different individuals and workplace ministries that are unaccustomed to that idea. So it takes time. The way I like to say it is you can't microwave these. You have to crock pot them. It takes some time. And last but not least is cross-sector participation, which in our way of thinking is 5 basic sectors: business, education, government, congregations, and nonprofits. And we recognize there are lots of other ways you could slice and dice channels of cultural influence, but those are 5 simple foundational sectors that we have found come up reliably everywhere.
Could you give me those once more? Business, education, what are the others?
Government, congregations, nonprofits.
Gotcha.
When you find those 4 things in place: shared vision, ecumenical posture, network infrastructure, and the cross-sector participation, what you start to see are different kinds of models that emerge that are true to that, but look very different from each other. The model that At Work on Purpose has looks very different from Austin Bridge Builders Alliance in Austin, Texas, which looks very different from the U.S. Christian Chamber of Commerce, headquartered out of Orlando, Florida. However, I would argue that all 3 of those have those 4 differentiating characteristics.
This is fascinating. How could you envision what you're trying to accomplish intersecting with CMDA's current or future ministry?
Well, it may sound odd, But in our way of thinking, you're a customer. Our job is to serve and support your success. If CMDA can flourish within the network that we have in the Cincinnati area, it becomes a node in the network. It becomes a knot in the net. Does that make sense?
In an initial way, yes.
So, and to be more specific, what that would look like is how does our ministry meet the people on the ground who are considered Cincinnati's leaders for CMDA, build relationship. Number two, in relationship, find out felt needs. What does help look like and help? And number three, bring visibility. That summit that we had last week was filled with local stories. We are a ministry that has never done summits with talking heads. These are people who live and work in our city or nearby who are totally real accessible people.
Okay. So is it possible to move from the vision that you have described into how this might come about, how we might be able to move forward in a way that enables our common goals to result in common overlapped ministry?
Absolutely. In our case, with the City-Wide Workplace movement, at this point, we're working with dozens of cities around the country that have a core of people that are building out citywide networks like I was just describing, in community with each other. In some of those cities, there's probably a substantial presence that you guys have, but you don't even know about these other folks. And in that case, what we would want to do is help support you by connecting you to the people that we do know that are on the ground in those cities. And that's a way we can help that canvasses many cities. Another way that we might be able to help is, like I said, more locally. I gave the example of Cincinnati, but more generally, the greater Cincinnati area, the Cincinnati-Dayton area. What does it look like in our particular sphere of concentrated influence to serve and support what you're doing? Third would be, how can we create some visibility to share the story of what you guys are doing as a way to inspire and attract others to participate? Bill, I would enjoy on another day, you and I could coordinate where I might interview you for one of our video podcasts that will go out to the whole At Work on Purpose network. We may very well have lots of Christian workers in healthcare who've never heard of you guys. And we could help to do that, but also give you guys hopefully a well-produced description of what you're about that would be a tool for you that you could put in social media, on a website or whatever.
Sounds like some great potential overlap. And I realize that a certain component of this has to be organic, that you can't come up with 3 easy steps to seeing Christ's lordship acknowledged through every form of work, that there's going to be starts and stops and I mean, when I think about the things that you've described, the shared vision, the interdenominational posture, that I don't know about the network infrastructure, but the cross-sector participation, you've really pretty much described heaven on earth. And I don't think I'm a post-millennialist, but I don't think we're going to get there right away. and yet the things you're striving for are godly pursuits that we are called to pursue, that we are called to believe that's what God wants in the unity of his people. And, as it connects with the New Testament church, as you were describing, I think about Jesus in John 17, praying for unity. Father, make them one, even as we are one, that the world may know that thou hast sent me. And then, in Acts 2, they have clearly been made one. and they had everything in common and they were meeting each other's needs. And look at the thousands of people that came to realize that Jesus was from God. So that's the fulfillment of that striving for unity that you're looking for. And I'm afraid of any organization that doesn't share those goals.
But it's countercultural, because just like local churches and denominations, we tend to be so broken apart.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to make sure, I think that Chuck's got to go. I think that Bill, you likely have to get running. We're at the end of our time. I heard 3 things about working practically in Cincinnati and Dayton, as like we're an hour apart. But I also heard about connecting potentially these City-Wide Workplace Ministries that Chuck is connected with. So I know that there's 46 that you all have identified, and you have this 16 city tour. If there's some potential connections and introductions so that there can be on the ground meetings, I think that's a good next step. We have a spreadsheet that kind of lays all those out that could potential for this, at least the city tour. Not the 46 yet. If you wanted to kind of can fill that out to see what other kind of potential introductions there were. And then you two reconnecting to discuss about visibility and interviewing. Does that sound like something to
Sounds
pursue?
like a very concise summary of next steps. Very corporate of you.
That's me.
Sounds like a good way to go. I'd like to
Chuck,
bounce off a couple other people at CMDA and get their thoughts as well. And I won't be back in Bristol for 3 weeks, but I'll be working for them remotely, and so I'll see what I can put together remotely, and then hopefully get together sometime soon thereafter.
Yeah, Bill, this recording is also a tool for you. If there's like part of it, I'll send you a YouTube link that you can share with some of your staff so that they can maybe get caught up to speed on a certain section. That can be really helpful to kind of catch the vibe.
Okay, that would be great. That would be
Okay.
great.
So,
All right. Hey, Bill, I will follow up with you. It was a pleasure to meet you. And Paul, thank you for being Mr. Networker.
you're welcome. This was a
Thank you
really
both.
fun time.
It's been great. Thank you.
Bye-bye.